So the piece you just were listening to was not by Ludwig van Beethoven, even if some people may think it was a composition by Ludwig van Beethoven, but it was a Fantasie für Ludwig, dedicated to Susanne Kessel, composed by Nino Tiro, a graduate magna cum laude in composition in the Liceo de Cagayan University, Conservatory for Music, Theater and Dance. Composed 2019. For this I will talk later more. But now let's go directly 250 years back. This day, 250 years back, was baptized Ludwig van Beethoven in Bonn. Why baptized? Because in that time was no birth registration, but we know that in the archive of the Remigiuskirche, where he was baptized, we have this date. Usually in that time, children were baptized 1 or latest 2 days after they were born. Now I think for the younger generation and for those who never visited Europe and experienced only hot weather, like in the Philippines, let's imagine how it was 1770, December in Bonn, Germany. For sure, very cold, because December, January, February are the most cold months of the year. Probably a lot of snow. In that time, no electricity, no gas or oil heating like now in the modern times. So life was very hard. That's the reason why many babies, unfortunately, passed away directly after they were born. So this is for sure that Ludwig van Beethoven was born probably December 16. His parents, Johann van Beethoven and Maria Magdalena Kevelich, were already the second generation of van Beethovens in Bonn, because the first generation was Ludwig van Beethoven's grandfather, same name like Ludwig, so Ludwig van Beethoven, the grandfather. He was the music director of the orchestra and choir in Bonn, and Johann van Beethoven was also part. He was hired as a tenor and violin player in this orchestra, and married 3 years before Ludwig van Beethoven was born, Maria Magdalena Cavendish. Let's have a look at Beethoven's birthplace. This is the house, the right side of the house, where the family Beethoven was living at that time. This picture is quite like it looked at that time. Nowadays, the front house, or the big house on the left side, is also part of the famous Beethoven-Haus museum. The birthplace, or the room in which Beethoven was born, is this small bedroom in the upper floor, and this is now a picture of the museum. So unfortunately there is no more the bed, but a bust of Beethoven, and the birthplace, the house, nowadays looks like this, and is full with instruments and letters and a lot of documents of Beethoven's time. There is even a digital archive and also an archive with originals, but we will not see the originals. So nowadays this house is Beethoven Museum. Vienna, where he lived the second part of his life, has only a very small museum, because all documents and notes and originals were transferred to Bonn to have this main museum. The front house, the memorial plaque, so officially you can see the date of December 17 is also the official date of his birth, but as I said before, it was the date of the baptism. Nowadays the house is well maintained, and in the back of these windows are the instruments of which were owned by Beethoven, and right side is the entrance to the museum. Yes, some years ago we were visiting together the museum in Bonn. This upper line are the great-grandparents of Ludwig van Beethoven, marked orange. The second line are the grandparents. The third line, the parents, and the lower line, left, marked red, is Ludwig van Beethoven, and the two only brothers who survived until adolescence, because in that time many of the siblings died when they were very young, or babies. So one brother is Karl, and the other one Johann. In these days, built 1989, there is the neighbor house of the Beethoven birthplace, was bought by the museum, Beethoven-Haus, and there was built in 1989 this wonderful chamber music hall with 90 seats, but a wonderful acoustic and a lot of very nice concerts with famous musicians, not only pianists, also string quartets. For this later. In Bonn, the old post office, so this is the building from the time of Ludwig van Beethoven. In front of this we have since 1845, so just around about 20 years after he died, was built this monument. Same time there was inaugurated a festival which takes place every year in Bonn, called Beethoven Fest. And yes, the sad thing about this is that normally, as we are now celebrating 250 years from the birth of Ludwig van Beethoven, Worldwide, we will be full of wonderful concerts with all his pieces, and the Beethoven Fest was planned to be around the whole year. Unfortunately, we have these terrible times of COVID, so no concerts possible. Even this lecture is not possible to be held with audience here. But I hope next year, when we will hopefully pass this pandemic, we will have all the concerts scheduled so that worldwide, or the whole world, will be sounding Beethoven, which was planned this year. Okay, so Ludwig, around age of 10, or the painter is unknown, but the reason that there is already a painting means that he was not a normal child or an unknown child like all the other children in Bonn. His talent for music was discovered quite early, not so early like another composer, famous composer, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. But like Mozart, Ludwig's first teacher was the father, and the second teacher was Christian Gottlob Neefe, who teach him composition, mainly composition, counterpoint, was also piano teacher, and at age of 11, Ludwig van Beethoven had the first concert, which was a big success, and the critics were praising his talent and the power he had when he performed. He performed the Well-tempered Piano by Johann Sebastian Bach. Unfortunately, Bach was in that time not so famous anymore because he was no longer modern. But to discover Beethoven's talent, it was very, very successful concert. This gave Ludwig van Beethoven the opportunity that the elector of Cologne decided to sponsor travel to Vienna, because at that time Vienna was the world capital for music, with very famous composers like Joseph Haydn, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Antonio Salieri. In 1785, Ludwig van Beethoven had his first travel to Vienna. Almost sponsored the travel and the lessons which he should have with Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, very famous at the time. But nowadays we don't know if the two composers, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, very famous, Beethoven, just at the beginning of his career, because in Bonn as a child and maybe beginning of teenager, he just composed some piano sonatas, which are still famous because the cycle of 32 piano sonatas by Beethoven, it's called under the view of musicians or musicologues, that's the New Testament for the piano. Parenthesis, the Old Testament for piano is the Well-tempered Clavier by Johann Sebastian Bach. So Beethoven was for sure very excited to see Vienna, musical capital in that time, and to meet Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. But probably they didn't met, or maybe Beethoven saw one performance of Mozart and maybe was too shy. I mean, it's all not proven, because I think if the two have met, and if Ludwig van Beethoven would have been student of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, for sure there will be some documents. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart used to write letters almost every day to his father and other persons, like a diary. So there is never mentioned the name of Ludwig van Beethoven. And as we know about the big talent of Ludwig van Beethoven, if Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart would have heard him playing or compositions, for sure he would have mentioned. On the other side, Ludwig van Beethoven never mentioned that he had lessons with Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, but he had lessons with also a very famous composer, Joseph Haydn, and also Antonio Salieri. Joseph Haydn was the composer who developed at the beginning of the classical period the symphony. Mozart was also a big fan or inspired to compose symphonies. So Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart composed 41 symphonies, Joseph Haydn 108. Ludwig van Beethoven composed only 9 symphonies, but I will tell later what the differences are. So, what we know about Ludwig van Beethoven, he was very thankful for everything he learned from Joseph Haydn about symphonies, and from Antonio Salieri about how to handle as a composer the voice and how to compose opera. And here we have a portrait of Ludwig van Beethoven, dated 1804-5. That time, Ludwig van Beethoven was already famous in Vienna, because his second travel and definitely moving to Vienna was 1792. So he decided to stay in Vienna and not go back to Bonn. Main reason was his mother died, so he had no reason to go back, because unfortunately his father had big problems, was always drunk, so he lost even his job. But I think the main reason was that rumors were going on that the French army will occupy this part of Germany, where Bonn and Cologne were located. So that was also the reason why the two brothers followed Ludwig van Beethoven to Vienna and lived there to be sure and of the war. Unfortunately, Vienna was short time later also affected by the war. we know that Ludwig van Beethoven sometimes needed to hide in the cellar of his brother Johann house, because there was bombing. So don't imagine, for a younger generation, so don't imagine airplanes with bombings, but cannons. And so many houses were also damaged in Vienna. And this might be also the reason why Beethoven's music was different than Mozart and Haydn's music, who didn't experience war. The political situation before was quite normal. There was a king or emperor and so. But now this year's end of 18th century was marked by a revolution in France and some other countries, and by war. And so Beethoven's music is always counted as heroic, and this leads me to his Symphony Number 3, which is called Eroica, but his dedication was first Bonaparte. Bonaparte was the last name of the famous Napoleon, Emperor of France, Napoleon Bonaparte, who was part of the leaders of the revolution in France. But later he declared himself as emperor, so he finished the Republic, the first Republic of France, and built again kingdom or empire. And that was the reason why Ludwig van Beethoven scratched the name Bonaparte and said, this symphony is in memory of a great hero. Ludwig van Beethoven, living since 1792 in Vienna, and some years later already becoming famous, premiered many works, especially piano works, string quartets, some symphonies, piano concerti, which is for piano and orchestra, violin concerto, and he earned a lot of money. There are some documents showing that for commissioned works, he got money, which for one commissioned work, he got so much money that he could live 1 year and pay all expenses. So now, when we imagine that every year he was composing many works, so he was a quite rich composer at that time. 1808, he premiered one symphony, one of his symphonies, the number 5, which marks a big change in how symphonies are composed or were composed before and were after. In general, I have to say that Ludwig van Beethoven's works were huge compared to how the works were composed in the classical period. We know also Mozart or Haydn symphonies, become longer symphonies already, but Ludwig van Beethoven already with his first symphony, and then the following, the length of the symphony was already double than the people were used before. But the critics always said that even the work is too long, because this was part of the critic, the ideas and the inspiration of this young composer is so big that it's capturing to listen to these works. Especially, you have to imagine that it's not only the size of the work, so how long it is, but every music is like a drama. So the format needs to be constructed in that way that really people don't get bored. And now this symphony number 5, which is very special, and I guess, or I think it's one of the most famous pieces of all times in the world. These 4 notes, I think everyone knows. When we think how melodies are built and how symphony, or the melodies, the subjects for symphonies are built, usually it's like this, that it's starting with the first note, but then it's in a direction, for example, to move forward. Now in this case, Beethoven is doing something very special. He stopped on the 4th note. So that's marked with a fermata, which for those who are not into music, so it's to hold. Now, what can be after this? So normally you're on a hold, then it's very difficult to continue. So Beethoven is creating a suspense because you don't know what will happen. Now the next. So what is Beethoven doing? He's repeating this 4 notes, okay, on the other step, but then again a hold, and it's a longer hold. So let's say the view of a musician or a composer, or even the audience in that time when there was the premiere. I can imagine they were kind of shocked, because the first appearance of these 4 notes with a hold, maybe they can imagine, okay, so this was like a wake up, and now the symphony will start. So Beethoven is repeating this, and the longer hold, which makes the confusion totally. So the audience in the premiere, I think they were between joyful and sadness and all the emotions, because they were probably expecting something different. Now the genius Beethoven showed how very long symphony, it's almost 1 hour, with 4 movements, can be created of this little seat of 4 notes. So this and the following symphony, the symphony number 6, which is what we call in music like program music. Very famous program music was created earlier in the Baroque period by Antonio Vivaldi, who composed the Four Seasons. And as the title say, there is the musical description of the Four Seasons, and also in every season there are a lot of describing moments, like the viola is playing like barking dogs, and so things like this. So this description of something you see with music is called program music. Now the Symphony Number 6, Beethoven was quite sure that the people will see this as a program music, and that's why he said, no, this is not program music, it's more than painting, because in the Symphony Number 6, the Pastorale, he's describing, let's say, a journey or a trip to the villages outside of Vienna, with the mountains in the background and so. The Symphony Number 7 and 8 were also again growing in the size. So this is why I said before that Joseph Haydn composed a bigger number of symphonies, because the symphonies were shorter. Mozart symphonies at the end were already longer, but the dimensions of Ludwig van Beethoven symphonies, when we count the minutes of all 9 symphonies together, it will be more than the 41 symphonies by Mozart. So that's the reason why the number, the total number of symphonies is lower. Even Ludwig van Beethoven, compared to Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, was lucky to live longer, because unfortunately Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart died early. So now the Symphony Number 7 by Beethoven has a very famous second movement. The classical symphony usually has the second movement is a slow movement, and this is a very special one because it's a marcia funebre, which means it's a funeral march. The Symphony Number 8 is also, I mean, this is not the only reason why it's remarkable. There are a lot of reasons, but then we need some days more time to discuss about this. So in the Symphony Number 8, the second movement is a dedication to Melzel. Melzel was the one who invented the so-called metronome. For those who are not musicians, that's yeah, like a clock, and you can choose which speed you want to play the music, and then you have like a tick tock, and then or faster. So it was for the first time in music history possible that a composer will indicate exactly how fast or slow his composition should be performed. And so the second movement of this symphony is inspired by Melzel, and Beethoven, to show up in music what it is about, made it like this, that the wind instruments will play equal notes almost the whole movement, and on top of this, the strings, they will have the melodies. Then the final finished symphony is the Symphony Number 9. They finished because there are a lot of sketches for the following Symphony Number 10, but unfortunately Beethoven died, so he could not finish the Symphony number 10. The finished one is the number 9, which is again a milestone in music history because he introduces in a symphony, which is a work for a symphony orchestra. He introduces the choir and soloists in the last movement, movement number 4, the famous Ode to Joy, which lyrics are by Friedrich Schiller, and it's expressing the wish of Beethoven, like many people in that time were wishing that all people will be equal, and no one is the king and the others are like slaves or so. It's a very, very ideal view of society, but in that time it was like a revolution, and anyway, there were the revolutions in many countries, but now the describing of this in music. Let me go back a little bit because I think almost everyone knows that Beethoven was at the end of his life deaf. And this is a very, very big problem for a musician in general, for a composer and conductor in special. And the problems that he was losing the hearing was started around 1800, so which means when he arrived, after a short time after he arrived in Vienna, he started to lose his hearing. And 1802, he wrote a testament, which is now known as the Heiligenstädter Testament. He wrote it to his brothers, and it is a very touching document because Beethoven was not only losing his potential to hear, but he was also sick with other sicknesses. So he had the impression he will die, and that's why he wrote this testament. But he is expressing really what he was feeling and all his emotions. And he's even mentioning to commit suicide, but the art, his art in special, is keeping him alive because he has so much more to say in music. But this shows us nowadays that really in that age he already had big problems to hear, which nowadays we can say was not so much affecting his compositions, because he was not completely deaf, but anyway he had all music he created was created in his head and his mind. But the problem was that he could no longer perform, which was a big part of his income, to perform and to teach, and also withdrawing, social withdrawing, because he could not hear, and then he didn't see any sense to meet other people. He could not talk with them. But he started to, at least with the people he had to talk with the publisher and his brothers and doctor, and so he started to use books and to write down what he wanted to say, and then the other person had to write down what has to say, and so which nowadays are very interesting documents, because with this it's more than a diary. We can exactly see what was going on, how his life was, what he was thinking, what he was composing, and all these things. So a lot of information, starting 1805 or 6, which means the last 20 years we know exactly what was going on. Before in his life there are some parts we don't know exactly what happened. There are some musicologues, they said, for example, in Bonn, the last 5 years, he was not composing. I don't think so. He was still composing, just the problem is that compositions from the time in Bonn are mostly lost. Even compositions we know by his letters, there was a composition also lost. And this is one of the houses where he lived. Beethoven, I think, was never satisfied with his living situation, so he moved very often during his time in Vienna. So the garden of the same house, and as I mentioned earlier, the instruments and books and notes, scores and so of Beethoven were transferred to Bonn, where around about 20 years after his death, a museum was installed in the first place. So there are 3 pianos owned by Beethoven when he passed away. 2 of these pianos are in the museum, and 1 piano is still in function and is used for chamber orchestras. I have to say that these pianos are not like the modern pianos. These are the so-called Hammerklavier or forte piano, a very special sound. As Beethoven had big problems, more and more, every year more, to hear, then, for example, Melzel, the one who invented the metronome, he built for Beethoven this hearing aids, but there are much more. Just this is one picture of the exposition in the Beethoven-Haus, Bonn. Beethoven died March 26, 1827, and the funeral was on March 29. This picture shows the procession, funeral procession, and yeah, many people said there were around about 20,000. Usually you see in biographies of Beethoven also this number. Sometimes you see the number of 10,000. Anyway, I think this shows the big appreciation of the Vienna people and maybe also surrounding. We have to imagine in that time Vienna was 360,000 people, big city, and 20,000 means then already a lot. The grave of Ludwig van Beethoven was first a small cemetery, but after some years it was his body or his remains were moved and brought to the central Friedhof in Vienna, so the central cemetery in Vienna, and there is a department with all the famous composers and musicians, as Vienna was for a long, very long time the musical capital of the world. So there are also the graves of Schubert and Haydn and other big composers. Let me talk now about this 250 years we are celebrating this year. A pianist, concert pianist in Bonn, Susanne Kessel, had 2013 the idea to invite composers to compose a piano piece for this year of celebration. And because it's 250 years, so then she was thinking, okay, for every year there will be one piano piece. As I mentioned, piano was very important for Beethoven and also for all composers following him and for all pianists, the 32 piano sonatas. So she invited composers around the world to compose a piano piece inspired by Beethoven or inspired by a work of Beethoven, somehow to have a connection with Beethoven. This was my first meeting with Susanne Kessel in Bonn, and this is the 250 pieces, piano pieces for Beethoven are recorded on CDs, and they are also in printed version. There are 10 volumes, and so every volume has 25 pieces. And yeah, as we are two people from Liceo, part of these 250 piano pieces, Nino Tiro and myself, we have also these pictures with the volume of the printed score. Now, as we started with the composition by Nino Tiro, we will end with my composition for these 250 piano pieces for Beethoven, which is the Fantasie über Ludwig van Beethoven. And I was not inspired by a piece of Beethoven. I just translated the letters of his name into music. Okay, now I want to thank Rudolf Golez, who is performing for this lecture. I want to say thank you, and I want to say thank you to all those who made this lecture possible. Everyone in back of the camera, technicians, thank you. And thank you to the CEO of the Kagayama University for this forum to talk a little bit about Beethoven, which 250th birthday we are celebrating this year. Thank you.